Today I tried something weird with my maps. I burned a hole in it. Let me rewind for a second. One of my subscribers has been asking for a map with a hole burned in it with a magnifying glass and a large magnifying glass drawn on the map. So I went outside on a bright, sunny day with a magnifying glass, pumped about the idea. All for it not to work. I tried multiple different magnifying glasses, using some that I had used to burn things before, but they didn't work. I sat out there for quite a while holding my magnifying glass and map, and nothing happened. So I decided to use a candle instead, which turned out alright, and I'm quite happy with the final product. And so, while I was drawing, I could not stop thinking of who the magnifying glass belonged to, and who drew the map. War divided the continent of Mirion in two for many a year, and strife for many a century. City-states filled the fertile eastern regions of Mirion, all the way from Lake Calawite to the forests of Ymir. The Crescent Mountains hugged the fertile lands, divided halfway by the river range. Rolling hills made up the lands, and the long glassy lake known as Calawite laid in the north in the hills of the north branch of the Crescent. Of all the city-states, two stood the tallest, divided by both thought and speech, Essica and Rilo. Essica was a warm city, surrounded mostly by hills with easy access to the southern forest of Ymir. Rilo was cold. The bitter winds that rolled off the north branch and over Lake Calawite hit the tall stone walls of Rilo often, bringing snow and hail with them. Though considered part of the fertile lands, it was difficult to cultivate a crop north of the river range, so many owned herds of yaks and thick-wooled sheep. The cold called for close community and strict rules, quite contrary to the free, careless beliefs of the South and Essica. Those beliefs eventually clashed. Tarshan Bélor became the Lord of Rilo in the third year of the Physic War. The plague had killed his predecessor, elevating the young man to Lord just a few months after he became the Lord's Chancellor. Lord Bélor was a wise, knowledgeable man, but to many was also eccentric in many of his ways. He was known to read fairy tales and study long-since disproven myths. He was convinced an ancient treasure lay hidden away in the mountains, so when he became Lord of Rilo, many were concerned for the well-being of their city. But Lord Bélor was anything but incompetent. He was swift in his actions against the south, rerouting several legions to take hold of an available village. As time went on, Bélor led a more and more successful campaign against Essica and their southern allies. He also read more and more mysterious books. Soon enough, the idea popped into his head of an artifact that he said could put an end to the war. The artifact was hidden somewhere in the mountains, likely where the Crescent met the river range. Continually, Bélor talked about the artifact that he began to call the Heart of the Mountain. His advisors and generals told him to forget the Heart of the Mountain and put his whole focus on the war, and he did, for a month. Tired of warring with the south, Bélor organized an exploration despite the warnings of his advisors. Setting his chancellor as acting head of state, Bélor set off from Rilo towards the river range, a load of books under his arm. Bélor and his team of 7 traveled through the hills many days, riding along the river range, mapping out the mountains, and trying to find the place where Bélor thought the heart of the mountain would be. Sunny days graced the traveling company, and warm days for winter shone upon them kindly. River crossings were constant, but the water was iced over in places and freezing cold in others. Wherever they went, they tried to cross where the ice was thickest or water was shallowest. A week of travel passed, and the sunny, warm days dwindled. They were quickly replaced by dark, foreboding clouds. The blizzard came quickly, barely giving Bélor and his team any time to react. Wind bit their faces, and snow hit them like a barrage of arrows. Huddling close under a rocky crevice and pulling their cloaks tight around themselves, the company ventured to wait out the storm. The horses died quickly or fled into the blinding, stinging snow, never to be seen again, and the men began to get frostbite and starvation. Hours turned into days, with no end in sight. Bélor, freezing, got to his feet and walked into the storm. "Follow if you dare," he announced just as the snow engulfed him. Only 3 of the companions were strong enough to stand and follow. Bélor and the 3 trekked deep into the cold, fearing stopping for the ever-haunting shadow of death that pursued at their heels. Slowly the snow let up. As the surroundings began to clear, the 4 could see the tattered, bloodied clothes of each other, as well as the mountain walls that rose up on either side. Bélor and his companions searched everywhere for food and drink, finding only a few winter berries and a small trickle of cold water. The next morning, only 3 awoke. Despising the sight of their dead companion, Bélor made haste to leave their camp and go in search of more food. Weak, the 3 climbed deeper into the mountains, unsure of which way the blizzard was and where the hills were. Just as the sun began to set, the companions stumbled upon a small shed on the side of the mountain. Spirits lifted slightly, they entered, hoping no one was there. The shed was barren, except a bag of oats in the corner and a ragged desk near the window. Overjoyed at the prospect of food, the 3 sat down to a meal of oats and drifted off to sleep. Morning came, cold and crisp. "We should find our way back," said one of Bélor's companions. Bélor sank his head, knowing the man was right. "But we've come this far," the other looked to his lord. "We don't have the energy to continue the search." The first hardened his gaze at the man. "And we have the energy to continue? Maybe this artifact will help us return." Bélor looked kindly at the man. "I am beginning to believe it was just old wives' tales, Dawson." The man stood passionately. "This is what you believed would stop the war, Lord Bélor. You can't give up on it. Think of all the people who will die yet if the war does not end." Bélor looked to the man who had cast his eyes downwards. He sighed heavily. "We will look for 3 more days." From the top of the mountain where the shed was, and quite a tall mountain it was, Bélor guessed that they were only a few miles from where the Riveth Range met the Crescent Mountains. He had deduced from his readings that the heart of the mountain was at the starting point of the mountains in Mirion, a place called the Tenth Louis. No one exactly knew where Tenth Louis was, but Bélor thought it was where the Riveth and Crescent met, so the 3 made off in that direction. The Tenth Louis, or the place where the mountains meet as it became known as later, was a small, forested valley at the bottom of 4 great mountains. Bélor descended into the valley, his 2 companions following suit. "This is where you think the heart of the mountain is?" Dawson asked. "As far as I can guess from my studies." "How do you know this artifact will end the war?" the other man asked. "I don't. I just guess." "Where did you get that notion, then?" Bélor paused a moment. "A storybook." The 2 nodded their heads and went silent. For hours, Bélor and the 2 poked and prodded around the small valley, climbing trees, digging up soil, lifting up rocks, pushing away logs, but still nothing was found. Crestfallen, Bélor turned to the 2. "I am sorry to bring you all away, and some of us to our dooms." His voice barely came above a whisper. Blankly, they stared back. "We shall return to the shed, fill our pockets with oats, and try and find home." The 3 awoke the next morning, the shed cold and drafty. Silently they rose from their slumber and began stuffing their pockets with oats from the bag in the corner. Bélor halted. The other 2 looked at him questioningly. "Did you hear that?" came his whisper. They strained their ears to listen. A slow thump and deep growl sounded from outside the shed. The 3 froze. A scuffle rang loudly in their ears. Then all was silent. "Do you think it went away?" Dawson glanced at the door just before it fell in with a crash. A hulking grizzly barreled through the splintered wood, snorting and growling, charging straight for the 3. Lunging to opposite sides, Bélor and Dawson cleared the way for the rampaging bear, but Creighton stood frozen in fear. Spinning back to see if the bear was still charging for him, Bélor watched the great grizzly mock Creighton straight through the wall of the shed. Fumbling for the short sword at his side, Bélor rushed to Creighton's aid. Dawson watched Bélor and Creighton struggle with the bear, no weapon nearby, and his frostbitten fists clenched at his side. Bélor, courageous as he was, swiped at the bear's nose and advanced forward. The bear stumbled back in a moment of fear, then raged forward once again, its eyes burning. After what felt like an eternity of fighting and pain, Creighton and Bélor finally fell to the ground. The bear, bleeding and limping alike, stumbled away from the shed. Dawson scrambled to his shaking knees and cautiously came to Creighton's side. He felt for a pulse, but found nothing. Kneeling next to Bélor, he saw he was still breathing. "You should have run, my lord." He coughed. "I should never have left Raylo." His voice was dry and ragged. "It is too late for that now. Is Creighton dead?" Dawson nodded. Bélor sighed. "There is a map in my back pocket. I want you to take it." Dawson fumbled with the pocket, then brought out a ragged, stained map. "This one?" Bélor nodded. "The 10th Louis is circled on there." He coughed again. "Ignore that. Go back to Raylo. You know roughly where we are." Dawson looked down at the man, afraid. The heart of the mountain never existed. Bélor's gaze was blank, then non-existent, as his soul left him and his head thumped to the floor. Dawson made his way slowly and wearily back to Raylo, recounting to the Chancellor what had happened deep in the mountains, and the fate of Lord Bélor. With a sigh, the Chancellor took the office of Lord. Dawson kept Bélor's map with him, the thought of the heart of the mountain frequently at the forefront of his mind. Many times he ventured back to the 10th Louis to search for the artifact, but he found nothing. After many years of searching, he mustered up the courage to venture back to the shed where he had last seen his final two companions. Their bodies were missing, and the shed was mostly destroyed, but the small desk that stood in the same place. Stricken with a sudden pain of grief, Dawson took Bélor's map from his pocket and the glass he used to study the map, and set the two on the table, leaving that part of his life behind forever. Then he journeyed back down the mountain and returned to Raylo. On the top of a mountain near the 10th Louis, sat upon a wooden table, the map of Lord Bélor rested, holes eventually burned into it by the glass. He had deduced from his readings that the heart of the mountain was at the starting point